Hi, and welcome to a Small Medium at Large podcast. I'm your host, Gail Hyson, bringing you intimate interviews beyond normal boundaries. I want to tell you about our returning special guest today, Professor Stanley Krippner. At the young age of 93, he is an American psychologist, researcher, and educator known for his pioneering work in dream research, consciousness studies, and parapsychology. Over a career spanning more than 6 decades, he has explored the psychological, cultural, and neurological dimensions of dreams, altered states of consciousness, and anomalous experiences. Stanley has served as a professor at numerous universities and has authored or edited more than 24 books and hundreds of scholarly papers. His research has included cross-cultural studies of shamanism and dreaming, investigations of telepathy in dreams at the Maimonides Dream Laboratory, and collaborations with researchers in psychology, anthropology, and neuroscience. He is a former president of the Association for Humanistic Psychology, the Parapsychological Association, and the Association for the Study of Dreams. Stanley has received numerous Lifetime Achievements Awards for his contributions to consciousness research. Stanley's work has helped bridge scientific inquiry with cultural and experiential perspectives on the mind, making him a widely respected figure in the interdisciplinary study of human consciousness. You can learn all the details in A Chaotic Life, the memoirs of Stanley Krippner, pioneering humanistic psychologist. Let's welcome Stanley here today. Welcome, Stanley. It's wonderful to see you.
Wonderful to see you too. I can't live up to that introduction, but I'll try.
So, we both just attended and returned from Virginia, where we were at the ACORN symposium. And I'm going to just tell our listeners a little blurb about it, which it stands for Anomalous Cognitive Occurrence Research Network. And it is a group of psychology or academic researchers who are studying exceptional human functioning in addition to researchers. The symposium is open to practitioners who help clients who've had anomalous experience as well as experiencers, people who often have had anomalous experiences. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this conference, because I believe this is a fairly new group of people that have gotten together. And I was wondering if you could tell us about some of the people or the people who attended this type of conference and why they are forming this particular network.
Actually, this is not all that new.
Mm,
There have been conferences, similar conferences, sponsored by the Society for Scientific Exploration, for example.
mm-hmm,
What's new about this is it brought in a different group of people who had never had a chance to collaborate with each other before, and who really felt vindicated by talking about their personal experiences and their research to a group of sympathetic people.
mm-hmm,
I think that you ask about specific people. Uh, Heidi Yurka was one person I'd be happy to mention.
mm-hmm,
She had worked for years with Andrea Pujols, an inventor and a pioneering researcher on the effects of psychedelics on telepathy, and she never had a chance to talk about those experiences before. And it was wonderful to talk with her and hear her presentation. And of course, she had a wonderful audience. And on conferences like this, it's not only the presentations, it's the discussions that take place in free time, at meals, and informally that often provide as much information as the conference presentations themselves.
Yes, it was so wonderful to see people I had not seen but had been in contact with only on the internet, like Paul Smith, and finally meeting Heidi Yerka. And I felt like I was at a homecoming or something of getting to see all these people I hadn't seen for so long. So it was John Cruth, and it was just such a lovely collection of people there.
Great. Mhm.
Was there any particular talk that stood out in your mind that you wanted to mention anything about besides Heidi?
Well, the presentations on past life memories
Hmm.
were notable because this is a highly controversial topic, and the speakers and researchers have often trouble finding an audience of peers to talk about these things. And also, we talked about small Paul Smith. The discussions on the Monroe Institute were so important. I knew Bob Monroe and followed his efforts to record his experiences in three really interesting books and form an institute that's now carrying on his legacy and doing pretty amazing things.
Hmm.
So, like you, I felt it was sort of an homecoming. In my case, of course, I met a lot of these people personally, but some of them I had not really seen for years.
I felt like it was such a wonderful gathering, and it was a joy for me. I have to say that it was a joy for me to see the amount of people who were who honored your being there. And most exciting to me was seeing the younger generation excited about meeting you and hearing your presentation, because these are young people who are in their 20s and maybe early 30. And it was so great to see that the next generation was being inspired by your work and they got the opportunity to meet you. And I loved seeing that happen. And I loved seeing their faces so excited. I thought that was a very special part of the gathering of people there, that it wasn't just all the people that we've known for so many years, but there was a whole group of young people there.
Oh,
Did
good
you?
heaven, you're more observant than I was. Of course, I should mention that in my presentation,
Hmm.
I talked about a 3 year project I've been a part of that now has established guidelines for therapists working with clients who have anomalous experiences. I remember the day when people who reported out of body experiences and precognitive dreams and the like were labeled psychotic
Hmm.
and put on medication. And nowadays, things are changing a little bit, but I think our guidelines will facilitate a more attentive focus on these experiences. And of course, this is very, very timely because some clients are reporting experiences with artificial intelligence counselors. And sometimes those counselors tell them to do self harm. And as you know, some young people have actually killed themselves as a result of these companions. Now, if they would only go to a therapist, the therapist could talk some common sense into their heads. The point is that not all anomalous experiences are benign, and a good therapist will know which ones are variable and can become part of a person's experience, and which ones are actually delusional and could be harmful.
Could you explain just in simple words for our listeners who maybe have no idea what an anomalous experience is? What
We
what
have,
falls under that?
yes. As you know, I co edited the book Varieties of Anomalous Experience And that book actually triggered a lot of the interest because it was published by the American Psychological Association. And we said to be anomalous, an experience has to be either rare or unexplained by mainstream science, or both. For example, synesthesia, the ability to see sounds, hear colors. That is rare, but it can be explained by what we know about the nervous system. On the other hand, a precognitive dream is not rare, but it is not explained by conventional science. So those are the two groups of anomalous experience. And again, if you don't want to use the word anomalous, you can simply use the word unexplained or rare or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I hope your listeners will be a little bit more attentive now to the importance of words that we use and why the words often have to be defined and explained to make sense.
I've had some anomalous experiences, and that's what they were called, and I couldn't understand what that really meant when Dean said this was an anomalous experience. And it was something I think that was unexpected, that they didn't expect to happen, and it didn't necessarily fit in with what they were looking for in the experiment we were doing. Something else happened instead. And that's how it got called anomalous. So would we also consider, when they talk about exceptional experiences, would that also be considered like anomalous experiences?
Okay, that's a very good question. All anomalous experiences are exceptional, but not all exceptional experiences are anomalous.
Uh-huh.
For example, a person can have an exceptional experience having a dream in which they solve a mathematical problem, and then they wake up and put that to use. Well, that is certainly an exceptional experience, but it's not really anomalous because all of the information was already there. We're just putting things together. Mm-hmm. I think that also we need to point out that.
Oh, we can't see you with your hands. You have to
put
your hands down. There we go.
That what is anomalous in one culture is not necessarily anomalous in another culture.
Oh, interesting.
Among many Native American tribes, it's very common to have spirits from beyond come to them in a dream, and we would consider that in mainstream society anomalous, but in a lot of Native American tribes, that's expected. That is not anomalous at all.
Mm-hmm. So different cultures have different reactions to things that, say, a Western culture might consider anomalous or exceptional, but in their culture might seem more like normal and not unusual.
Of course. Mm-hmm. I spent a lot of time in Brazil, and in many of the African Brazilian religions, it's very customary to have visitations from the deceased, and they can actually have technologies to correspond with the deceased, and that in their culture would not be anomalous at all.
I find that I've been in these experiments, studying telepathy. And when you go to certain cultures, telepathy is a normal way of communicating. It's not considered anything exceptional. It's considered a way of getting a message to another person, because that's how, for generations, that culture has communicated. Did you find that as well?
Exactly. Also, you used the word exceptional a moment ago. I can give you a better example of an exceptional experience. Mm-hmm. Somebody who goes out in nature and is overwhelmed by the beauties of the flowers, the trees, the lakes, the rivers, and overwhelmed by all of this beauty. Well, that's an exceptional experience. Not necessarily anomalous, at least. However, it might be anomalous to that person. It would not be anomalous in terms of psychology because these epiphanies do happen and they can be explained easily. But to that person, it might seem to be anomalous.
So
and then also we have the term peak experience that is used in humanistic psychology. And a peak experience is something very positive that is above and beyond one's ordinary experiences and is a wonderful feeling of joy and bliss. It can happen again, communicate with nature, solving a mathematical problem, having a sexual experience, etc. Well, some peak experiences are anomalous, but most of them are part of the human condition, part of who we are.
Part of who we are. So I want to talk a little bit more about this before I go into some questions about shamanism. I have my little list here. The one thing I wanted to say that I got out of the conference is I'm just an experiencer, and I was just there as, someone to speak and etc. But when I had to listen to all the different talks from professionals, like the woman that was a neuroscientist or neurosurgeon or something, and how she wants to do research in these areas that her peers are not accepting or respecting the work she's doing, and she's putting her whole career on the line to do the research that she feels really needs to be done. And I had no idea how therapists and psychologists, all the limitations that they were under in treating patients that have out-of-body experiences, that speak to spirits, that have anomalous things that happen to them. I had no idea what a challenge it was for them to be able to treat their patients and also stay in the guidelines of whatever they're supposed to follow. I felt like the people I were meeting there were all like superheroes who were actually standing up for other things and putting their jobs. It wasn't money that was motivating them. It was getting this research and having these things done. Did you feel that way as well?
Well, I think that this is one of the values of that particular conference, for people to know that they are not alone and to give them the courage to treat patients, to do research their own way and their honest way that might not be approved by too many of their peers.
Right.
And I think that this is one of the reasons these guidelines I talked about are so important. We're trying to get those guidelines distributed as widely as possible so that therapists and counselors will know how to work with clients and patients who have these anomalous experiences. And also, I have to tell you that there are psychiatrists now who are publishing in psychiatric journals about anomalous experiences, and this is a real breakthrough.
Wow.
Now, psychologists have a wider variety of journals, and of course, if they publish in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology or the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, this is a wonderful place for them to publicize their findings. However, it's harder to break into some of the other mainstream psychological journals. Again, in anthropology journals, these have been talked about and published all the time for decades. That's not so much of a breakthrough. And of course, I found the anthropologists, and I'm a member of the American Anthropological Association, very much more accepting of anomalous experiences than other professions. But you raise an important point there are some neurologists who are now taking an interest. And it's interesting that every now and again you see a mainstream neurological journal publishing something in which anomalous experiences are explored. So, times are changing. They're just not changing fast enough to help people, to help a lot of people.
So, what advice would you give young researchers entering the study of consciousness today, like those lovely students we saw at this conference?
Well, first of all, I would tell them make sure that you have adequate training in your profession and make sure that you have developed proper research skills, historical backgrounds, and be aware of the theoretical formulations. Once you have that grounding, then it is less likely that you will be attacked when you start publishing something because you have not only the degrees, but the grounding and the skills to make a convincing case. Now, once you have those bases covered, then you have to be very careful in terms of where to publish, what conferences to speak at, and to be very frank to protect yourself. And I think there are more venues available now than there have been ever before. So I think things are much better for young people who want to embark upon that field and take that route.
Than say many, many years ago when it was much more difficult. So why do extraordinary experiences have such psychological impacts on people?
Well, first of all, not all anomalous experiences have that much of an impact. Some people just dismiss them, say, well, that was just a dream. Well, that was something that I ate that disagreed with me. And they just brush it off. But people who are affected by anomalous experiences realize there's more to life than they imagined. That a lot of things that they've been taught, not only in their schools, but by their conventional religions, just don't make sense anymore. And this requires a rethinking of their priorities and a reevaluation of their worldviews. And they cannot often do this alone. This is why they need to know who to contact, what wise counselors or therapists or spiritual teachers can give them sound advice.
And mentors like you, I know you have helped hundreds and hundreds of students and people that you've mentored through these years in your work as a professor at the universities. Should psychology treat such exceptional experiences as meaningful, even when they are not scientifically verified?
I think that, first of all, a lot of experiences are scientifically validated. Take past life experiences. There's a wealth of scientific verification about past life experiences, even though that is completely foreign to mainstream worldviews in our society. Now, there are some experiences that might not be scientifically validated yet, but they can still be treated as experiences. Abraham Maslow said, an experience is a little bit of data. You can't disregard it. You just treat it as data. That's a scientific approach. That is data, and it can be evaluated and discussed. So you don't discard it. It might be of value to you.
So when we talk about past life, there was a very interesting presentation. I believe it was Sean Rubin, and it was about a case where the child is referred to as Nina.
Yes.
And I think you're familiar with this story, correct?
Oh, good heavens, yes. Jim Matlock is working on that case, also Sean Rubin.
Yes. So
And
could you
it,
tell our listeners a little bit about this case? I was fascinated. I had no idea about this until hearing it in the conference.
well, this young girl began reporting experiences that occurred under her previous name of Nina. And the Nina that I know, Nina Graboy, had exactly the same birthday as that young girl had.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, it would be just like Nina to come back and take a new identity
I think I have her
in
book
a
right
different.
here.
There you are. Yes, yes. Oh my
So,
God.
okay, so that's the book. Sean just gave this to me. I wanted to read about it after I heard this story. So go on.
Yeah, they showed that book to the young girl and said, "That's my book."
So, but
Yes,
that little girl, when she saw that book, she was only like 4 years old or 5 years old or something.
yes, right. Mhm.
And she knew that this book was about her.
Yes, right. Mhm.
Now, how could that be if not a past life experience?
Well, that's I said. Sometimes you ask, what is the best explanation?
Mm-hmm.
And you can say, well, it can be coincidence, but that does not make sense. Or you can say that little girl had clairvoyance, remote viewing about that book. Well, of course, that's unlikely. A girl of that age with no background in remote viewing. So I think the past life explanation is the most efficient way to explain that young girl's recognition of that book. Quite a story.
Didn't she also exhibit like she was, I think I remember something about that. She wasn't actually old enough to read, but yet she was knowing what was written.
Yes, remarkable, right? Mhm.
That's
Yes.
that's a remarkable thing to.
Well, her parents are also in touch with the Journal of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, which has been carrying on research into past lives for decades. And so they're getting good advice. And so they're not making that young girl feel strange or unusual or anything like that. That's just part of her daily experience. And of course, the research indicates that when children reach the age of 6 or 7, those past life memories begin to fade away and
Uh-huh.
are usually forgotten. But then by that time, they've served their purpose.
Hmm.
Not all of them, I should mention,
Hmm.
but in most cases.
And is that because do you think they start school and watch television and are told other things, so
Yes,
lose
exactly. Exactly.
they
So
lose the connection?
they have new perceptual input in new stories, and so the past life stories just sort of faded away.
There was also discussion on autism. Someone presented about their research with autistic children, and I'm not sure if it was dreaming together or oh no, it was past. I think it was past life experiences in autism. Was
Yes.
that
Mhm.
was that something also they've been working with?
Well, that is something new. And to be very frank with you, there is a lot of nonsense about autism in the media today. I
Mm-hmm.
think the worst example is that vaccinations cause autism. There is absolutely no scientific verification of that link whatsoever. Autism is shall we say, a neurological diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably mainly caused genetically or by some neurological quirk during early development, even before birth. And so there are easily discernible ways to explain autism. Also, there's a whole range of autism. There's a spectrum. Some autistic people are functioning perfectly well in society, even though they have an autism diagnosis. It's true that they often have trouble relating to other people or showing empathy. Those are some of the traits of high-functioning autistic people, but those traits can be developed and learned. And then at the other end of the scale, there are autistic people who have no speech whatsoever and have a lot of difficulty taking care of their daily needs. And I have a former student, Henny Cooperstein, who is working with those autistic children, and she is teaching them music and teaching them how to communicate through music. And she has a wonderful website. She would also be a wonderful guest for you. She's doing work with autistic children that nobody else has ever done, giving them a life rather than just be treating them as vegetables or something inert. So there's a whole range of autistic people. And I have to say that I've been interested in this for decades. Back when I was teaching classes at Kent State University, autistic children were viewed as the result of a mother who was not showing empathy. There was a book called The Empty Fortress explaining autism because the mother was in a fortress, rigid with no love, complete nonsense. And I knew that was nonsense. From my study of the brain, I knew that this was something neurological. And I remember one day a mother came to me with her autistic child, and she was so worried. She said, "Oh, I'm just an empty fortress." I said, "Oh, no, that's ridiculous. Your child has a brain that's different than other children." And she was so relieved that I was the voice of authority that relieved her misgivings and guilt. And of course, there are many other women who I never touched who felt guilty, and that was no good for them or their children.
At the conference, I was hearing about something I didn't know about, but I think you might. It's something called the telepathy tapes.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about that? And then I'll go off of autism after that. But I thought that was, I don't know if that's going on right now. I don't know exactly much about it, but have you?
Well, frankly, I was never persuaded that that was well done. If it was well done, it should be published in a peer-reviewed journal. And I hate to be so rigid, but there's a lot of interesting developments. And I say, if those are worthwhile, write them up, submit them to a peer-reviewed journal. And don't tell me that no peer-reviewed journal would ever publish them. I have stuff published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration and also mainstream journals on very controversial topics. So I don't believe that argument at all. So there's a lot about the telepathy tapes on the internet, and frankly, I cannot take it seriously because the research is not well done. And of course, the telepathy tapes deals with autistic children. You know, the premise is that because autistic children have trouble communicating verbally, they pull upon their psychic resources to use communication. And so that's the rationale for looking for psychic information on the part of autistic children. it might or might not be true, but this is a legitimate area for research.
Great. So I'm glad they're researching it. It sounded very fascinating to me that autistic children would be communicating, because from the few children I've interacted with, I noticed they had tremendous communication with animals, and I would
Oh,
consider that
that
that telepathic almost, because they're not talking to the animal, but the animal is with them and doing what they want. So
exactly. That's a very good topic for research. Very good topic for research. The relationship between animals and autistic children and how well they communicate. Right.
yes. Okay, so I'm going to mention one more thing just in case anyone here is listening about autism, that there is a great 1 hour documentary by an autistic filmmaker, Scott Steindorf, and it's called Understanding Autism, and it's on PBS, and I highly recommend it. I found it very educational and very positive, and showing a nice different attitude toward what autistic people are living and going through as he interviews them around the country. So I'm going to leave our autistic topic now, and I'm going on to, if we could, like, we have enough time, I would like to now talk about um, a little bit about shamanism, if that's good with you.
Of course.
And I want to mention that I have our shamanic mask here that you gave me, I believe, from a Bulgarian shaman.
Right, right.
And I wanted to put up here is the revision, Jürgen Kremer's edited journal. And I'm so glad that he did this because all of your articles in it are incredible. Each article is a different aspect of something that you've done with shamans or places you've been. And I just thought it was just a great collection of your work and beautifully done. So for our listeners who don't know anything about this sort of thing, could you just explain what is a shaman?
I'll be happy to. And also, I want to mention that listeners who want to buy the revision journal, they can check it out online. Revision. Very excellent journal.
It's
So,
is it revision.org?
yes, exactly.
Okay,
Right,
so it's revision.org, and you can download or you can order hard copy or you can download uh, past and present uh, issues and volumes.
right.
Great. And I also want to mention that I do want to, before I close off on our ACORN discussion, I just wanted to thank Sean Rubin and Jake Glazer for putting together such a wonderful event. So,
Exactly. They did a
yes.
wonderful job.
And I
Yes.
look forward to hopefully going again next year. So, back to our shamanism. If you could explain what is a shaman to some of our listeners who've maybe never even met a shaman or even had a shamanic experience. For me, that's a regular everyday thing, but for other people, it may never have happened once in their life.
Well, I give a very common sense definition. A shaman is a person who is a socially designated practitioner. Now, that's important. A shaman has a community. They have to be socially designated. They can't just come out of nowhere and say, oh, I'm a shaman. No, that doesn't make sense. And they have the ability to obtain information by means that other members of their community cannot access. In other words, through dreams, through psychedelics, through visions. But then they use that information to help and to heal members of their community.
Mhm,
In other words, they don't keep it to themselves. It's a part of shamanism. You use it to help people.
mhm,
And your listeners might not know that you are a shaman because you were socially designated by Mongolian elders.
Mhm.
And so you didn't just come out of nowhere and say, I'm a shaman. No, you have the credentials.
Mhm.
And other people that I know, other shamans, they also have their credentials. And there are a number of ways that somebody becomes a shaman. They just don't come out of nowhere and hang up a shingle and say, I'm a shaman. They often have a illness.
Mhm.
And when they recover from the illness, the spirit world tells them, you've recovered from this illness so that you can help people who have similar illnesses. So that's the wounded healer type of shaman. But
Mhm.
also you have the shamans who are part of a genealogy. Their parents, their grandfather, their grandmother were shamans. So
Right.
it's in the genetic line. And so
Mhm.
they maybe are the third generation to become a shaman. And then also there are shamans who have some sort of ecstatic experience. They have a vision, and the vision involves uh, spirits coming and putting that gift upon them. And then when they come out of that vision, they're never the same again.
Right.
Now, there are ways that one acquires those skills. I have so many stories about shamans. One shaman in Indonesia acquired those skills through dreams. Every night, the spirits would come to her and give her a new skill so that she could help people in her community. And
Mhm.
when I was with her, she treated nearly 2 dozen people during the day using those skills. Sometimes they were talking skills, sometimes used power objects, touching them with a magical stone, sometimes with listening carefully. And they paid her a little bit of money. And she said, if I cannot help you after 6 sessions, I don't try to take your money anymore. So this was not like the psychoanalysts who treat people for years, raking in tons of money.
Mhm.
Rohana Lair, that was her name, said, if I can't help you in 6 sessions, go someplace else. I've done the best you can.
I, I have to say, in my 35 years of healings and interactions with shamans, I've never been asked for money from any of them. And the only thing that was accepted was anything you wanted to give as a gift or as a donation, but
That,
nothing was ever required. It wasn't like for $45 an hour you can have me. It was nothing like that. But that was
yes,
my experience. And I do agree with you that there are people that are just saying, "Oh yeah, I just did this. I became a shaman," but that's not. There's a lot of that going around because in fact, one of my questions for you is do you think that shamanism is more popular or more mainstream now than, say, when you were first exploring Brazil many, many years ago?
oh, absolutely. When I first came into contact with shamans,
What year was that?
that was probably before you were born.
Okay, so the 50s. Okay.
Yes, yes, yes. It was at a conference on parapsychology, and Grandmother Twyla Nitsch, a Seneca Indian elder, spoke at the conference. And that was my first contact with a shaman, and I got to know Grandmother Twyla. And that just one thing just led to another. And at that time, if you went to the literature, you would find psychoanalysts saying, well, shamans are psychotic.
Mhm.
And all of these visions they talk about are an example of their psychosis. Others said, well, they're neurotic, they're hysteric, and they are well meaning, but they can't really help anybody because they're too neurotic themselves. And then there was another group of people who said, well, yes, they're psychotic, but isn't it wonderful how their community treats them so well and does not expel them and simply accommodates them? Well, this is a very condescending view of shamans. And of course, none of these mainstream explanations were correct.
Mm-hmm.
It was not until actual research began to be done with shamans, and when psychological tests were given to shamans, it was discovered that they were actually the most emotionally mature members of their community. I detail all of this in my writings about shamanism. And then you had people coming to the picture like Roger Walsh, a psychiatrist who wrote the best introduction to shamanism in his book, The Spirit of Shamanism, who was able to provide a psychiatric basis for shamans and how they work. And publications like that really helped to turn the tide. And eventually, there was an encyclopedia of shamanism that came out maybe 25, 30 years ago. And I was asked to write the chapter on the psychology of shamanism. And I began to teach psychology of shamanism at a university. And so I've done my best to sort of bring psychology of shamanism into the mainstream. And now, no longer do you have shamans being cut down and called psychotic. Thank heavens. I've lived long enough to see things change and turn. And also, I have had so many publications. When I have an experience with a shaman, I want to record that, and I write a short article about it so that their wisdom finds a wider audience.
Was there any instances where you fell upon an illness or some sort of experience where you received, you yourself received healing from shaman and you experienced the healing directly?
I was in Brazil many years ago, and I felt very disoriented, and I was due to have an interview with a shaman. And the shaman told me that in my travel, I had picked up a mischievous spirit. And that was not an evil spirit, but just a mischief maker attaching itself to my mind and body. And so the shaman did a series of laying on of hands and passes, and within minutes, I felt much better.
Yes.
So that was not a major issue, but it was certainly one that I had experienced very, very directly. Also, while you're talking about the topic, I think that my most important contact with shamans was when I was in Brazil at the City of Peace giving a lecture in Brasilia, and it coincided with an emergency meeting where about 36 shamans from the rainforest gathered in a little waterfall on the City of Peace property in Brasilia. There was an emergency because doctors had come to visit their tribes, and one group of doctors took the shamans into the rainforest to study herbs, and the other group drew blood from the members of the community. And the shamans came back and they said, what did we do? Oh, we gave blood, vaccination. And the shaman, in vaccinations, you put something into the body, you still take something out of the body. They knew that this was mischief. And what had happened is that these doctors had gone to several tribes in equatorial areas to draw blood because they wanted to know how people living in those very, very torrid zones could function well. And then they were selling the blood on the internet to industrial firms whose workers were going into the areas.
Wow.
And so the shamans came up with a Declaration of Indigenous Rights. And by that time, I had met some of the shamans during dinner and meals. And because I speak Portuguese, and the shamans all spoke Portuguese in addition to their native language, I was able to converse with them. So at the end of their stay, they gave me a copy of the Declaration, and they want you to publicize this. Now, can you imagine the coincidence of me being in Brasilia where they were having that incredible conference? So, of course, I translated it into English, and I put it on the internet. I published this in 3 different journals, and the people at Harvard University went through their, oh, we don't have anything to do with those people. Well, of course, that was a lie. They had a Harvard affiliation, and all of that trafficking stopped immediately. And I know that this was effective because a few months later, a filmmaker friend of mine went to Brazil, and in customs, they examined all of her equipment, and they said, we want to make sure that you don't have equipment to take blood away from our Indians. So, in the shamanic world, those coincidences, of course, are very, very common. And the fact that I happened to be there while they were having their conference was just incredible.
Definitely not coincidences. Definitely meant to be.
Yes.
So, I was thinking about shamanic rituals and shamanic power tools and men and women in shamanism. And from my experience, but I don't have as vast an experience as you, when I've gone to the few different cultures I've been in, you could be a woman or a man and be a shaman. There was no like, oh, only men are shaman or only women are shaman. Each one was given an equal place in the shaman role. And I'm also was looking at what things did I find in common, say, from a Mongolian shamans and a Huichol shamans. And I was wondering what things or items or tools or were the things cross culturally that you find all shamans seem to have, or was there any differences in cultures where you found women were not allowed to be shamans or were, I'm just curious as how that was in other places around the world.
Oh, absolutely. Of course, I've met many female shamans. And the first shaman I met, grandmother Thailand, is a woman, of course. And in my experience, the world of shamanism does not restrict itself to gender. And in Korea, for example, the majority of shamans are women. I've been to South Korea twice, and I have witnessed some wonderful shamanic interventions, and the only ones who I witnessed personally were all women. Now, there are male shamans in Korea, and I met one of them, but I never saw him perform. I saw the female shamans perform. Also, back to Brazil, one of the most famous shamans, really in history, was my Menonita de Gonfa. My little woman is little mother woman of the city of Gantois.
Mm-hmm.
And she was legendary, and people would come to get help from all over South America. And she was so famous that her papers and paraphernalia became part of a museum.
Wow.
Great honor. And I was so happy that I got to meet her. And I also met her daughter, Cleosa. And Cleosa didn't want to become a shaman. And she said, but when the spirits come knocking at your door, you don't turn them away. She knew that if she refused a call, she would pay the penalty. She'd get sick, and she wouldn't recover until she got the call. So those experiences with the mother and daughter, were some of my absolutely priceless experiences with the shamans. And again, observing them and all of the respect that was given to them by the community was incredible. By and large, shamans are members of a community. And as I said before, it's a community that confers a status on them.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't go off and live as a hermit. They interact with a community. Rulifunder, who you've heard of, was actually a brakeman on a railroad. And he retired and got benefits, and then he turned himself full-time to being a Native American medicine man. And the shamans in Brazil who were living in the rainforest, again, all members of their community playing a vital part in a community. So shamanism is very community-oriented. Good heavens. Go ahead.
I was reading in the revision on in your different articles about, and I had not known about this, about shamans that can be either they may be a man, they may be a woman when they're doing their shaman work. That there can be an actual changing of gender when they're as a shaman. I don't know if you could speak a little bit about that, but I thought that was very interesting, and that they would dress in different clothing and be a different gender.
Oh, good heavens, yes. The Siberian shamans, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It's customary for the male Siberian shamans to wear an article of clothing that is generally worn by females. Why? Because they want that female energy with them. And in some traditions, a shaman switches back and forth from a male role to a female role because they want the different energies to be with them. And there are some Native American tribes who give great honor to what we would call transgender individuals, and many of the transgender individuals become shamans. And they're given great honor. They say, well, the Great Spirit gave them a very, very neat ability, and many of them become shamans. So this is an important topic that you mentioned. And again, the shamans hold energy from whatever source they can get, whether it's a different gender, whether it is a different tradition. I mean, shamanism is not a religion. I have known Buddhist shamans and Christian shamans and Jewish shamans and Hindu shamans and pagan shamans. And they pull from that tradition to practice. Shamans are very eclectic. They pull from whatever source of power they can get. And of course, that brings up the topic of power objects.
Mm-hmm.
All shamans have some sort of power object, whether it's something they wear or a necklace or a crystal or a semi-precious stone or an image of an animal. Most shamans have a power animal
I
that
like the
they,
jaw harp,
yeah, there you are. Yes.
my power tool. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Right, right.
In fact, when I was visiting the museum in Mongolia, you saw that Chinggis Khan and his men that were the heads of his army were all shamans. And they all were trained in shamanic ways, and they all played the jaw harp. And they were the ones leading into battle. And so these things, shamanism dates back, is it more than 3,000 years before, or how old would you say shamanism is?
The best estimate is it goes back 50,000 years. And if your listeners want a resource, there's a wonderful book, 50,000 Years of Shamanism,
Mm.
by Jeremy Narby.
Mhm.
And it documents the appearance of shamans in the literature that go back that far. So, shamanism has evolutionary benefits. Think of it this way: the shamans would prescribe rituals, herbs, etc., for sick people. If the sick people recovered, that ability became part of the gene pool. And the unusual individuals who had that ability would pass on those genes to their descendants, and their descendants, and their descendants. Now, what if the herbs were placebo and did not contain an active ingredient? Didn't matter. As long as people recovered, that had survival value. So, shamanism has evolutionary roots. I've written about that in one of my articles
Mhm.
on evolution of shamanism. And I'm not the only one that's written about that. So, yeah, shamanism goes way back.
It seems the things that I found in common was some sort of uh, musical sound, whether it was a drum or a flute or a rattle. There was some sort of feathers or animal skin or something. And like you were saying earlier, some kind of stones or other things that were power tools. But I found that when I've seen different shamanic cultures, I've seemed to have seen some of that, at least some of it in each culture. Like,
Oh, absolutely. Music is so important in shamanism.
hmm
Usually it's a drum because the drum produces a rhythm that can help alter their consciousness. Sometimes it's rattles, sometimes it's other musical instrument, singing, chanting, all of that. I don't know any of the shamanistic traditions that I'm familiar with that don't have some sort of music as the very basis of their work. Absolutely.
yes, yes, I think so too. So let's see, I'm going down here in my shaman question list. And let's see. Oh, wait, that's answered. Okay. I was wondering if we could speak a little bit about Maria Sabina. And was she a shaman?
Oh, good heavens. Maria Sabina is the most famous shaman of them all. And I was
And
fortunate enough to meet her.
okay, I
Why is she
can't see
important?
you though. When you put your hands up, I can't see your
Hey,
face.
pardon me.
Okay.
I just get so excited talking about these things.
Yes, well, Maria Sabina, the only thing I know about her is she was in Mexico and she was the lady of the mushrooms, maybe, or
Right, right. Gordon Wasson and his wife Valentina were mushroom experts. He was a investment banker professionally, but they heard that the sacred mushrooms had not died out in a remote area of central Mexico,
hmm
Oaxaca. And so first Gordon and then later the two of them went to visit. And remember that when the Spanish came to South America, they did their best to eliminate paganism and make everybody Catholic. And they even murdered some of the shamans. Very disgraceful history. But in Oaxaca, they just went underground. And for centuries, they were practiced underground.
Mm-hmm.
And then Maria Sabina had a vision, and Jesus Christ came to her and said, "You're going to have a visitor, and you need to reveal the secret of the mushroom to these visitors so that they can spread the word and more people can get the benefit." So when Gordon Wasson came, he started to ask about mushrooms, and the townspeople, "Oh no, we're all good Catholics. We don't do the mushrooms anymore." And then Maria Sabina came out and said, "I was told by Jesus Christ to share the secret of the mushrooms with you, and I will give you a mushroom balada, a nighttime ceremony." And so Gordon Wasson took the mushrooms and Maria Sabina and changed his life. He was so excited about this. And later he came down with his wife, and then they wrote about it. I remember a Life magazine article, I think in 1957.
Wow.
All of her name was in disguise, but as soon as I read that, well, I want to take the mushrooms myself. And that was my initiation into psychedelia.
Did
This
you
was
take,
like,
did you go down to Mexico and take the mushrooms with her, or was it something you did here in the United States?
I did it in the United States first, but I
Okay.
did go to Mexico, and I was very fortunate enough to interview Maria Sabina, and she explained to our group that she was too old to administer the mushrooms anymore because it took a toll on her, and she referred us to her student, uh, and her student, Clarissa Millet, arranged the mushroom ceremony for us.
Mhm.
And she said, "This is the dry season. I don't have quite enough mushrooms to go along. One of you will have to abstain." And I said, "Well, I've already taken the mushrooms." And she said, "Oh, fine, you can be my assistant." And I learned more being her assistant than I would have learned taking the mushrooms. So the mushroom ceremony got started, and I noticed that she was taking candles and dripping the wax on the ground and then sticking the candle in, and she gave me some candles. Well, this was difficult for me to stick the candle on the wax, and then I realized why. She'd given me the candles with a bumpy surface, and her candles had smooth surfaces. And I, well, this is an attempt to show that she's smarter than the gringos, and so I didn't make an issue of it. And so then one couple was having trouble, and she sent me off to help them. There was a pianist who had lost his ability, he was a stage fright, a Mexican pianist. And then a young woman, well, not so young because she was a Miss Kentucky and she had nothing left but her beauty, as her beauty had faded, so she had a midlife crisis. And they were taking the mushroom, and so they were talking to me, and they were both so happy they had a breakthrough, and they started kissing me, one on one cheek, one on another.
Oh,
Ordinarily, this had been fun. But they had been vomiting, and their breaths were so stench, I nearly asphyxiated from the smell, but I put up with it anyway. So I learned so much. She sent me around to several other people who were in trouble. And then in the morning, the psychiatrist, Salvador Oquette, who had sent me to Maria Sabina, had a therapy session where everybody could exchange experiences and how they had affected their life. So that's my Maria Sabina story, right?
so did you meet her more than once, or just that one time when you assisted?
Two times in the same week. Yes,
Hmm.
wonderful experience. Mhm.
Wonderful. And I think, don't you have something that you're very, is one of your most prized things? Was it singing from her or something, or a song or
Oh,
something?
good heavens, yes, yes. She was well known for her spontaneous poetry and her chantings, and she would just sing off the top of her head. It was spontaneous. And the chantings were so beautiful that a couple of actresses have used them on one woman's shows, just reciting the poetry. And she would come up spontaneously. The mushroom tells me that I am a wise woman. The mushroom tells me that I am a clock woman. The mushroom tells me that I am coming from the stars. Beautiful stuff, all spontaneous.
Uh, Wonderful. So you still have those recordings to listen to, correct?
Yes, all those recordings they're available
That
from Folklore Records should either viewers want to get a set of their own. Yes. Mhm.
that's wonderful. So I'm gonna see here where I'm going down here now on we're talking about indigenous people and indigenous healings. Are there scientific frameworks emerging that better explain altered states used in indigenous healing?
Well, yes, this is now called decolonizing psychology, where psychology and also psychiatry are giving credit to indigenous wisdom and finding ways in which the best of the indigenous wisdom can be integrated into mainstream practices. And I
Hmm.
think that this is a very, very happy event. Now, of
Hmm.
course, one has to be discriminating. Not all indigenous wisdom makes sense. Nothing is perfect. But by using, shall we say, common sense, one can find aspects of the indigenous wisdom that can be a part of mainstream psychology. For example, I was recently asked to write a chapter for a book on indigenous psychology, and
Hmm.
they assigned me Italian traditions. And so my co-author and I did a lot of research. We also did field research in southern Italy and came up with a number of with a framework that I think gave justice to the indigenous Italian traditions that have been around for centuries. One example. This will be
Hmm.
there'll be a whole book on indigenous psychology. There'll be a chapter of it.
I know you've spent a bunch of, I think you, maybe I'm wrong, but did you make trips to the Philippines at all?
Yes, I did.
And did you
And
ever see this? I've seen different films. I've heard things about this psychic surgery or where the hand is goes into the person, but there's no cutting. But then I've heard about how it was a scam where there was really hidden blood, or I don't know. So I was wondering, did you ever see any of that where you could see that it was not it was actual true shamanic healing work, or what was your experience, or did you not see any of that at all when you were in the Philippines?
well, yes, I did see some so-called psychic surgeons who were obviously using sleight of hand, but also I witnessed one who didn't really open up my body, but she did seem to pull something out of my body that looked innocuous enough. It was a little herb that she said was irritating me.
Mm-hmm.
And what I had said, which nobody had taken me up on, the way to demonstrate this is two ways. First of all, find somebody who has bullets in their body and have the psychic surgeon remove the bullet. The other option is okay, find an animal and implant something in the animal, sew the animal up, and see if the psychic surgeon can remove that from the animal. Nobody has taken me up on that.
Okay.
But one of my former students, Scott Hobo, has now bought a house in the Philippines. He did a dissertation on the psychic surgeons. And he is convinced that some of them were actually genuine. And so that dissertation is available for anybody that wants to read it. The point is that something like that is just so outrageous that it's easy for mainstream publications to just write it off as sleight of hand. And of course, much of it is sleight of hand. The trick is, even if it's sleight of hand, the person can recover anyway because of the placebo effect. So the local people really don't mind at all, just as long as they get well. From the outsider's point of view, the criteria are much more rigid. And that's why I've come up with my 2 experiments. And that's how Scott Talbot has done very close inspection, and his dissertation is available. So that's what I can contribute to that issue.
Thank you. I've always something I've wanted to wonder about. So are there any lessons that Western medicine could realistically adopt from shamans?
Yes, I can think of a couple.
Okay.
One is the importance of ritual.
Okay.
And Western physicians always use a little bit of it. They wear a white uniform. That's not necessary at all, but that's part of the ritual. Also, the shamans listen, by and large, they listen carefully to their clients. And again, Western medicine often involves just doing a test, writing another prescription, sending people on their way without explaining why the medicine works and listening for questions and giving enough time. So it's a two-way conversation rather than a one-size-fits-all conversation. And I think that another issue, the shamans have interesting offices with power objects on the wall. And also the instruments you're talking about, like drums visible. The doctor's office should not be antiseptic completely. There should be a little bit of color or something of interest in it to make things a little bit lively for the patient.
That would be nice. So I'm gonna start winding down now. I'm just gonna see what else I have here. Okay, I was thinking about Ruth. Oh, the okay, how do natural. Okay, I just wanted to ask you a couple, just one or two dream questions that I'm curious about, because I do know that you keep a dream journal and you have for many, many years. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So I'm wondering, are you thinking that are dreams becoming different in the digital age? Like because the next all this other generation is everything is social media things. Things are coming at us from the computers and these sort of things. Are these affecting people's, we're saying like somebody who was dreaming back in a time when we didn't have all this technology, they might just be dreaming about a bear chasing them or something. What has dreams changed because of all this new technology and things that were instant gratifications and instant information?
Well, as a matter of fact, I think they are. Dieter Barrett is a colleague of mine who I think you met years ago at one of my New York City parties. She is the person who's an expert on this. She charts how media are affecting dreams. In my case, I remember the first dream I had about a computer, and I thought that was highly unusual. Now I have dreams about computers and the internet and all the time. It was just the other night about typing something on my computer and cutting and pasting. I don't use social media very often, so no, I don't have dreams about social media, but I do have dreams about computers.
So it has entered into our our dream life. Um, and let's see. I got three more little questions. They're short, and then we'll close. Um, well, maybe they're not so short, but what role has storytelling played in your career? I find storytelling is what I do on my podcast, and that's what I'm doing with others is sharing stories. And I'm wondering, I find them to be a powerful tool, and I'd like to know how they played in your career and if you feel the same way that storytelling is a very important thing.
Well, yes, storytelling has been very important for me. Ever since childhood, I've enjoyed hearing stories and also telling stories. And of course, shamans often tell stories. This is often a part of their healing. Milton Erickson, the famous hypnotherapist, did his hypnosis work by telling stories. And my memoir that he wrote, A Chaotic Life, that's a series of stories.
Hmm.
So I go to conferences, and much of what I do is to tell a story to emphasize a point. And all of this goes back to the stories that my parents would tell, that my teachers would tell, that I would read about in books. So, of course, life is a story. Some stories are simple, some stories are complex, some stories have happy endings, some stories don't. Some
Hmm.
stories are circular, some stories are linear. So telling a story has been a part of my repertoire for decades.
It's wonderful. Uh, what belief did you once hold strongly, and maybe this isn't true, but that you later changed in your mind about? Because
That's
you
easy.
started out as a, trained, and you were working in Maimonides and you had your whole plan. But I think things might have changed over the years. I was just wondering if there was any idea that you had that has changed completely from when you started your career. Okay, so we were winding down our talk here, and we had a little glitch for a second, but that's no problem. I have two questions. We were asking about if there was a belief that you have changed your mind about that you might have started many years ago thinking something else in your career. Was there anything that you strongly felt that you had to change later in your mind about things?
Only my point of view on women. I used to think that a woman was not complete unless she had a husband. That dissipated early on, but I believed that for several decades of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Thank heavens I got beyond that. And when women's lib came about, I thought, well, it's about time. They can correct other people's point of view too. Yes.
Wonderful. And uh, I was wondering if you could share, last of all, well, two last questions. What do you think is the most misunderstood idea in parapsychology? Are they going down a wrong path or misunderstanding or anything you might want to say on that?
I think that the most misunderstood by the general public is that this is paranormal. Parapsychological experiences are completely normal. The
Hmm.
extraordinary is completely ordinary. You just have to take a wider view and a cross-cultural point of view to realize that. In terms of where parapsychology is going today, I think it's doing just fine. I think that the outstanding reviewers and experimenters like Dean Radin, with whom you work, are doing excellent work. So I really have no major uh, issue with where the field is going. I'm just very happy it's moving along with very limited money, but at least it's moving along. Yes.
Great. So this is my last question. First, I want to say how much I just enjoy being with your company and how much I've loved traveling with you and that you're a continued inspiration for people in your field and inspiration for people like myself. And I always think if I'm traveling or doing something, I say, Stanley would go on to do the next thing. And I keep that in my mind. And I say, I'm not tired. I can do whatever it is we have to do next because Stanley has enough energy to do all these things. And I'm just really impressed by it. So I was wondering in our closing now, if you could share any words of wisdom for our audience today, and it can be on anything you would like to share, whether it's shamanism, conferences, autisms, or anything. Doesn't have to be careers, whatever you like that you would like to leave as your words of wisdom for the audience today.
Well, first of all, I never tell people how to live their lives. I've made so many errors in my own life. Who am I to give advice? The only thing I can do is to reflect on what has sustained me. And I guess I could put it this way. We have very few choices in our life because of the constraints that our society and our genetics have placed upon us. But when there is a choice, choose love, choose wisdom, and choose happiness. Do not choose power. Do not choose money. Do not choose prestige. So that's the best I can come up with.
I think that's a very beautiful message, and I think our audience will be very happy to hear that. And uh, what a wonderful place it would be if more people listened to that advice. So I want to thank you so much for being with us here today, Stanley. I want to
Always
thank,
a pleasure.
oh, it's just a
Always a
joy.
pleasure. Yes.
And I want to say thank you to my family for supporting me in my podcast, for my son producing the show, and my daughter Nancy for posting it, and for David reviewing all my descriptions for the shows. So I'm really grateful to them. And I'm also grateful to all you listeners for standing by us, for watching, liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing. It's just a joy. We're on our 117th show, and we're so happy to have some returning guests as special and as wonderful as our dear Stanley Krippner. So remember, everyone, share your stories because stories can heal. Bye.
Okay.